What's up, you guys? Sean Ross Sapp, FightfulSelect.com, Retro Review. I'm here with Mr. Warren Hayes. Hi, Warren.
Starts off with a sigh. Is everything okay, Sean?
We covered WCW World War III 1998, so what do you think the answer to that is?
Yeah, I know.
First off, let's talk about how you sold this to me. You know, Sean, it's you said 25th, but it's the 20th. It's the 20th anniversary of Chris Jericho versus Bobby Duncombe Jr.
Well, you see,
man,
I have such high regard for you, Sean, that I figured that you'd be able to see through this bullshit, right?
Come on. I thought, I had heard back then, Bobby Duncombe had a couple good matches and maybe he had some chemistry with Jericho. I remember hearing that. Man,
but this is actually the last World War III that WCW ever put on. This was the end.
Mercifully. Now, as a kid, I was like, wow, 3 rings, 60 guys, all at the same time. That's amazing. I have never actually watched a World War III match until this.
Well, I remember going out of my way to get my hands on the first one because in my area in Canada back in the day, getting WCW pay-per-views was not all that simple. But I did manage to see it because, it's a fantastic idea on paper, because even was the 4th or the 5th installment, even there, they hadn't, worked out the production kinks to make sure that we got the full extent of what 60 guys fighting at the same time really feels like.
So I will go back and watch the other World War IIIs because they had 3 prior to this, and I am shocked at how much of a cluster it was still after all this. We had just covered WWF Survivor Series 1994, and a big theme on that show was the lack of star power. That was not the case here. Even without Hulk Hogan, which they brought up 90 goddamn times on the show that he wasn't there, there was a lot of stars on this show. There were a lot of big names on this show.
But there were still a lot of big names missing, like Hogan, like Warrior, who was there at the time.
Yeah, unfortunately.
Sting wasn't there either. Flair, who had just come back, and Flair was in the midst of his Eric Bischoff feud that was going to culminate at Starrcade.
Even with all those people missing, it felt like a more star-studded show, especially considering a lot of these guys would go on to have decent careers. But then I look at this undercard and I'm like, woof. As far as star power, the first several matches were not great. But let's go ahead and talk about it. Wrath defeated Glacier in 8 minutes, 22 seconds. I gave this a 4.25 out of 10. I'm going to go through my scale here as I do before every show. 1 out of 10, or it's a 1 to 10 scale, starts at a 5. If it gets up to 6, that's recommended viewing. The leap between 5 and 6 is pretty good, pretty big. If it goes backwards to the 4 area, probably not so good. It was probably dead, flat, just not on the same page. If it's beyond lower than 4, it's probably a trash fire. This got a 4.25 out of 10, and Glacier sucks chance. Glacier was not working at this point, Warren.
No, did he ever?
No.
We could argue that, right? I think it just got worse. It got progressively worse.
And he had spent several months on a big losing streak. He was not winning. He would eventually become Coach Buzz Stern.
Oh my God, I had forgotten about that. But I honestly do not remember, maybe outside of his premiere, I don't really remember Glacier winning matches at all.
Well, I remember Wrath winning matches because I was a fan of Wrath, especially when he came in. And I had mentioned to you around probably 92 to 95-ish, I didn't get to watch a lot of wrestling. I just wasn't allowed to. So I missed the Adam Bomb run, essentially. I knew who he was, but I didn't he kind of got rid of the mullet a little bit. And losing a mullet can change an awful lot, Warren.
Look at Baron Corbin.
Look, hey, exactly. So Brian Clark, at 33 years old, shows up in WCW, starts doing the Meltdown, a really convoluted power slam, but God, it looked cool.
It looked fantastic.
Pump handle and a power slam. Wrath was over here.
Well, we've talked about this before on our 1994 Survivor Series recap. I personally, it's one of wrestling's greatest mysteries, how Brian Clark's career never got bigger than he did, because it was still an era where the big guys ruled, where, you know, both Vince and Eric and company over at WCW, they valued their big, strong guys. He was mobile, even a little more mobile than Kevin Nash. He could move around. He had an interesting moveset. He was charismatic, but I don't understand why it never really took off. And it was interesting during this match, because at some point Tony Schiavone starts putting over the fact that Wrath has had such a big year, trying to put over the fact that he's breaking out. He's got movie opportunities coming for him. So, being the journalist that I am, I went out to and did a little research of what are these movie opportunities we're talking about. And Brian E. Clark is on the Internet Movie Database. He had a role in the Mortal Kombat Conquest television series. He played Burly Citizen. Yes. But he also had the leading role in Axeman 2 Overkill. Let me just read the description for you, the synopsis. And this will end Warren's movie recommendation segment of the show. When a band of crazed evangelical Christians, murderous bank robbers, and revenge-seeking vigilantes descend upon Cutter's Creek, there's only one axe-wielding local legend that can separate them and dismember them.
Oh.
So he played Axeman in that movie, and there's really nothing else. So I'm really curious as to what Tony was talking about.
Wrath would be retired 4 years later. Sad.
But
37 is very young.
Yeah.
And that's just sad, especially today. You're hitting your prime at 37 these days.
You got the experience, you've got the know-how, but the rings are not as unforgiving as they were back then. There's always the legend that the WWE ring started becoming a little softer when Vince McMahon started bumping, the fact that guys are still having, competitive working careers when they're in their late 30s and into their 40s, it's still fairly new.
So that's a good point. When Vince started bumping, they did change the rings. So into the match, Wrath turns Glacier inside out with a clothesline. The announcer talks about Wrath being on Mortal Kombat in January, and they discuss the benefits and detriments of wrestling before a battle royal, as if there is any benefit. Wrath should have been DQ'd here, by the way. He didn't let go of the choke by 5, like 2 or 3 times.
No, and the ref went. I think he was actually pulling the choke on the outside, and the ref actually went to the outside to try and pull him off. He should have been DQ'd.
Yeah, this was a terribly reffed match, and I always say it is an unwritten, not even an unwritten rule. It's a rule. Any good wrestling trainer will tell you, don't bury the ref in the first match of the night. If you do that, there's no reason to respect that ref throughout the rest of the night.
Unless you're in New Japan.
Yeah. Wrath using the ropes when he didn't need to on a pin. I'm like, why? He's huge. Seems off-putting in retrospect. This match had no psychology, just Wrath choking a lot and not getting disqualified. He hits the buckles with all the speed of an anvil, and then eats a couple of really terrible kicks from Glacier. Glacier goes from the ice pick, which is the Asiatic spike.
Terry Gordy's Oriental thumb.
Yeah. It's countered. The thumb is countered. How about this? The ice pick gets melted down.
Oh.
Wow. Big pop. Wrath wins. Fuck. Stevie Ray is out with Vincent. He defeated Conan via DQ. This got a 4 out of 10. It went 6 minutes, 55 seconds. My interview with Stevie Ray went much longer, making a finisher. If y'all don't mind, give that a little twizzy tweet. It's a few months old, but it's timeless content.
Evergreen.
So WCW producers don't mind switching cameras like forever on an abdominal stretch from Conan. It's just, let's keep it here. Keep it here. Make it as boring as possible. This is a battle of NWO Hollywood and NWO Wolfpack. That NWO theme, I am reminded of how iconic it is. And that Wolfpack theme was a slapper. People loved it, Warren.
They did. And I mean, yeah, what else can you add? It did. It just worked. But, I think, Eric Bischoff knew what buttered his bread too. And I think he probably pushed his whoever was in charge of music to come up with the better themes. Maybe crunch them a little harder, but yeah, I mean, it's hard to forget the both NWO themes. This
was the era of audience participation, and Conan was all about it, and he had his stuff over. Schiavone has to cover for Conan when he whiffed on a kick by a mile. He says the kick was blocked, but Stevie Ray still went down. I thought Schiavone was great on this show.
Mm-hmm.
This is one of Schiavone's better calls that I've heard. Like, he took his nootropics and brain formulas and all that stuff, and he was on. There were a couple of really big, stiff clotheslines and slow bumps. Stevie Ray is back up, walks into a face jam, then accidentally gets hit in the face with a slapjack by Vincent. Stevie Ray tells me that Doug Dillinger made the slapjack.
Made it?
Made it. That Doug Dillinger walked up to him and said, "Here, they told me to make this for you." And that Stevie Ray says, "I did not ask for this." Which I thought was hilarious. They just told Doug Dillinger, make him a slapjack. Doug Dillinger does so. Head of security makes a slapjack, takes it to Stevie Ray. Stevie Ray, all 6'5", 300 pounds of him, goes, "I did not ask for this." And then it became his gimmick for the rest of his career. Phenomenal.
He even had it on his tights.
WCW, you guys. And I loved it. I liked his version of the slapjack, the move. It was a lifting pedigree. He wouldn't jump out. He was bigger than everybody. So he lifted them up. A little bit different. So the ref calls for the bell after Conan won't stop a beating. This was bad.
And what I don't understand, I did not understand the psychology of the ending here, because I don't know. The match, first of all, wasn't all that long, and it was fairly, it was a slowish kind of match. Didn't have anything really horrendous that would justify Conan losing his mind like he did and going into a ground pound and forcing the ref to call the match, because really it just came out of nowhere. It's like, okay, Conan is slapped, didn't take his meds, whatever. It didn't jive. It was a weird ending.
It was. Booker T comes out to make the save from the beating, but Stevie says he doesn't need his brother's help. I will say, despite the crap that happened before, both of these guys looked like stars, and Stevie Ray was way old at that point. Not way old, but I mean, for that era, if you are, I think he was 40 at this point, that's pretty old. And in WCW, if you're 40, not DDP, and don't have an established run, that's about it. And another thing, like you had mentioned, the rings back then were way harder.
Mm-hmm.
So 40 then is a lot different than 40 now. And a lot different from 40 now when people are learning about recovery and DDP yoga and all these things that people do to take care of themselves. So Stevie Ray would transition soon, not soon after this, but about a year and a half after this, into being a color commentator. But he still looked like a star, and Booker T really looked like a star.
Yeah, for sure. When he came out, he looked great like that. And it, back then we used to talk about, when I'd hang out on the Usenet boards, the term NWO B team would be thrown around quite a bit. And, you'd include guys like Stevie Ray and Vincent and Horace. And to an extent. Well, Buff Bagwell was in there. The Disciple. There was a whole bunch there was a whole strata of wrestlers in the NWO that, that you felt didn't belong because of the prestige that it just carried.
Yeah.
It was a weird time for backstage shenanigans as well. And I don't think that these shenanigans translated any better than when you looked at what happened within the NWO. I think you could always glimpse at what was happening backstage, who had whose back and who was talking in whose ear.
You look at the NWO B team and some of the members. Stevie Ray was essentially the leader and founding member of that, like a few months later. And I remember that term being thrown around on DDT Digest, was the site that I used to go to.
Oh my God. Yeah, me too.
I love DDT Digest.
Yeah.
I would go there for all my WCW stuff. They had the Giant, who was a big player in WCW, but had fallen by the wayside. Kurt Hennig, who was a legend of wrestling. Scott Norton, who was huge in Japan. The Disciple, who they didn't really reference as the Booty Man or Brother Broody or whatever the hell else he had, but he headlined a Starrcade with Hogan. You had Brian Adams, who had tried several different things in WWF, and then you had Vincent and Horace, who Vincent was what he was. He was a heater. That's it.
Yeah.
Up next, Sonny Ono and Ernest the Cat Miller defeated Saturn and Kaz Hayashi. This gets a 3.75. It went 8 minutes. It was not good. Lots of powdering by Miller and Ono. Heenan says, he can't wrestle with glasses on. And Tony Schiavone goes, yes, he can. Well, take the glasses off. The timing on strikes and kicks and the sells today are so much better than back then.
Mm-hmm.
And you had a couple of high-level martial artists in Sonny Ono and Ernest the Cat Miller. Sonny Ono had some seriously good kicks in this. He turned over his hip. He landed with his instep and his foot. Like, there were a lot of really good kicks in this. They don't do anything to Hayashi, but they look nice. Miller hilariously Sparta kicks Hayashi like across the ring. Just boots him in the chest. Saturn tags in, gets some great suplexes, some good kicks of his own. But man, Ernest Miller is as green as goose shit in this match. He is not good.
No. And, I listened to 83 Weeks, and recently, whenever Ernest Miller comes up on the Eric Bischoff podcast, he always mentions, how he brought Ernest Miller in. He was his buddy. He was his buddy. I think it was his trainer to begin with.
Taught his kid karate, I think.
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly it. And yeah, you sort of look at this and you're like, yeah, maybe a couple of months more in the power plant would have done him some good.
Oh yeah.
I think it was, he was brought in a little early, but this is the kind of guy whose character I've always had a soft spot for, not as much as in-ring work, but the way he conducted himself, the way he worked the mic. I mean, he was fantastic. And when he do the James Brown thing, I always thought that was hilarious, despite it being an extremely cheap knockoff. But then again, Honky Tonk Man was knocking off Elvis. It wasn't that big of a stretch. I thought, he had a lot of upside, but it was sort of outside the ring.
I don't like to date our podcasts. I like to keep them not time sensitive, but Inside Baseball again, we're filming this October 19th. How about this one? Ernest Miller wrestled last weekend.
What? Was it at the Big Apple in Ontario?
No, it was in Rome, Georgia for the Arn Anderson homecoming party. And he defeated a team called the Beautiful Bald Besties, some locals. But he teamed with Glacier and Bullet Bob Armstrong.
Oh, man.
Bullet Bob Armstrong. Other people on this show, the Real Nature Boy, Paul Lee. Are you familiar with him?
I am not familiar with the.
He is a Ric Flair mark who does everything he can to look like Ric Flair and paid Ric Flair to endorse him. Those were legitimately the biggest stars on this show. And QT Marshall facing Cortez Castro of Lucha Underground.
Right.
Some homecoming for Arn. 175 people showed up at the Coosa Valley Fairgrounds, hanging from the rafters.
Apparently.
I just want to remind you, I drew that many at the Aberdeen River Park for an outdoor show where the barricade was made of caution tape. Hot dog. Poor Arn Anderson. What did he do to deserve this? Now, Ernest Miller at this point had been wrestling almost 2 years. He debuted in February of 97. So this is still pretty bad. Mm. Ono gets force tagged in and put in a submission by Saturn. Miller accidentally hits him and then takes a hilarious jumping sell on a double drop kick. Hayashi's selling was really bad too, but everything is over because this era of wrestling is so hot. I don't know why Shivani calls a roundhouse kick a back leg front kick. And I get it. You're kicking with your back leg. You're doing a front kick. But just call it a kick. A back leg front kick. Saturn is a house of fire, but Ernest Miller kicks him. Ono pins him. This was a trash fire. 3.75 out of 10.
Yeah, they tried the comedy bits with Sonny Ono, and I was looking at him, and I'm like, wow, this is the poor guy's Toru Yano right here. In psychology wise, why would Ernest Miller force the weakest element of his team to stay in the match? Because Ono wants to tap out because it's not going well. He wants to tag out. Sorry, not tap out. He wants to tag out to Miller. Miller forces him to stay in, but why? I did not understand that. And Miller did most of the heavy lifting here, of course, but,
Woof. Well, it's not all bad because we got a WCW Cruiserweight Championship match. Kidman defeated Juventud Guerrera to become champion. 6.5 out of 10. This was good. So Gene Okerlund goes off about Hoovy wearing LWO colors. Gene Okerlund, you trifling bitch. Mind your own business. How about that?
Right?
He was just offended about everything. He was a precursor to modern day be upset about everything. What are you doing wearing what? These colors.
And not only that, he ran out after him because Guerrera was coming to the ring, and then all of a sudden you see Okerlund running up behind him.
Gene Okerlund caught Juventud. Juventud is fast in 2018. He was in his prime back then. Gene Okerlund waddles out there. Man. Fast. Now, this faction had just started about a month and a half before this. It had Eddie and Psychosis, La Parca, El Dandy, Silver King, Villano, Hector Garza, Ciclope, Damien. Some of these guys are still wrestling today. Most of them, actually. But a lot of them were guys that they just, quite frankly, the last 6-7 names I mentioned, they weren't doing anything with those guys.
Nope. And again, Eric Bischoff likes to talk about how, and to an extent, he's right. He likes to talk about how in WCW, one of the things that set him apart, that set WCW apart from WWF was the fact that he went and got these cruiserweights, these junior heavyweights, and had them compete on American television, which is something that we weren't used to seeing. And again, back when I was on the boards, these were the moments that everyone was looking most forward to when watching WCW, because most of the stuff that the NWO was in was very clustery. It was this was the moment where you got your great matches. And he likes to talk about how, he made these stars. He made, the Chris Benoit's and Dean Malenko's and Chris Jericho's, but there are a lot of incidents and moments where, the cruiserweights were just disrespected. The number of times on a Nitro where the cruisers are having like a tag team or a 6-man tag team match, and 3 minutes in, the outsiders arrive and start tossing them out of the ring, or Hogan and Giant. And this happened more times than not. I mean, often enough for people to start noticing. So yeah, to an extent, and then there's another good example later on that I'll gladly point out, but there was a certain level of what are we doing with these guys?
Yeah.
They're too small. We don't quite get them.
Well, this match was very good. Eddie goes off on Rey Mysterio saying that he needs to learn to make sacrifices for his family. This was not a good promo at all. Juventud, technically 23 years old here.
Mm-hmm.
He turned 24 the next day. He is also the best in-ring worker on the show so far. He does a great rocker dropper. It's not a Faymaster. It's the old rocker dropper where you hook the arm and kind of sit down. Kidman does a sit-down power bomb, power slam, and a slingshot leg drop. These old rings look like they had no give at all. There's a nearly catastrophic spot where Juvi does a top rope Hurricane Rana to the outside on Kidman, who's on the apron. This spot today never works. Like I always see this end poorly today, 20 years later.
Yep.
Kidman does a move that will become known as the mark of excellence. It is essentially where you look like you're going to do a back body or back suplex, belly to back suplex, and you turn it into a Uranagi. Mark Jindrak used it years later. Goes ring to ring with a big body press. The crowd doesn't like it, but Juvi did get the shoulder up. The crowd thought this was 3. I went back and watched it several times, Warren. Juvi got his shoulder up.
Yeah, he did.
So it's like, bitch all you want. But hey, a super Frankensteiner hits for Juvi, as is a Juvi driver, but he is too exhausted to pin Kidman. Juvi goes for a 450, lands on his feet, but had a Hurricane Rana in too deep, and Kidman can't kick out like he was supposed to. So this one was closer. Kidman was just wrapped up. What are your thoughts on what we've seen so far?
Listen, it was fantastic, and Juvi was one of the cruisers that still managed to get over and get some heat from the crowd, because despite the fact that he was pulling off these fantastic moves, the audience was still chanting "Juvi sucks," but not as much because he wasn't performing well, but he actually had a character that was getting over. So I was like, good on him. Kidman on his as far as he went, I was impressed, and I think this is one of his hallmarks though. He could sell like it was nobody's business. Like Juvi just looked like a master here. And Kidman was just putting over his offense like crazy. I was having a lot of fun at this point.
This is a real good match, and it makes me want to go back and watch a lot more cruiserweight wrestling from that era. Kidman capitalizes on the dumb idea that anyone would ever powerbomb him. Like, that's just stupid. Don't powerbomb Kidman. Today, don't powerbomb Kidman. He follows up with a wheelbarrow suplex. Mysterio reappears and keeps Kidman from getting pulled off the top rope. Kidman wins with the shooting star press for the win. Good stuff. Eddie and the LWO come out and beat up Kidman, and he wants an answer from Ray. Didn't Ray just answer him, Warren?
Yeah, there was a bit of ambiguity, I think, and of course it had to come full circle at the end. I thought, the ending was okay. It helped advance the storyline. So what can you do? Kidman was deserving of this. He was in the Flock had disbanded a few months previous to that, because he had come into WCW, if you recall, in Raven's Flock as a heroin addict. Sean, do you remember this?
Yeah, hell of a gimmick.
His arms all scratched up. The shooting star press being called the 7-year itch.
Yeah, to be honest with you, I didn't know that. I knew it was something drug related as a kid. I didn't know heroin, but let's be honest, that made Billy Kidman.
Well, I mean,
that whole time heroin made Billy Kidman what he was.
Okay, let's go with
Tori Wilson interested in him
for sure. I always had a soft spot for Kidman. He always looked like the cool guy, who'd listen to he'd listen to the latest bands, the latest shit from Seattle, but walking around school and but never like putting himself over anyone else, not being pretentious or anything. He'd high five the nerds. He'd have good words for everyone. Oh, you thought this girl was cute? Hey man, come on over. I'll have her talk to you. We'll just strike up a conversation. A guy who's got his back and who's got your back. And I think that's one of the reasons why he got so easily over. He just looked like a buddy, a friend that you have, a good friend. I think that's one of the reasons why he got over so easily. And I always sort of thought that if WCW had played its cards better and really pushed him like as a likable babyface underdog, like literally the underdog thing, it would have worked naturally because he just had that likability. Apparently good enough likability to start dating Tori Wilson.
Yeah, I mean, they did try. I mean, he beat Hogan, but the thing is, by that point, he had already been kind of like the cocky party guy a little bit.
That's it. If they, I really feel like they had, the smaller white meat underdog, it would have worked magic with him because he had the naturals to just be over with the crowd.
We were supposed to get Rick Steiner versus Scott Steiner next. The match didn't happen. Buff is out with Scott and some NWO ref with a whistle who's very animated. It is a young Slick Johnson, from what I understand.
That's his name?
Yeah, he would be in TNA as well.
Okay.
It looked like Brian Adams. Brian Adams wanted to be Diesel so bad right here.
Mm-hmm.
NWO Hollywood all beat up Rick Steiner. Then backstage, and they bring out Rick, who gets beaten up by Scott. Goldberg makes the save with a huge spear after Scott flips him off.
Hang on. Let's this is the one of top 5 Goldberg spears.
It was great.
The way Steiner hit the mat, it was severe, but you could tell there was Scott Steiner flipped him off. You sort of felt that they weren't exactly cooperating with each other. I think Goldberg put a little more extra sauce on that one.
I think there was some very healthy competition between Scott Steiner and Bill Goldberg because Scott Steiner and it's my guess, I think Scott Steiner looked at Bill Goldberg and said, why not me?
Mm-hmm.
Why not me in that spot? I've been around longer. I'm better in the ring. I'm over. And they had some good matches together, but Bill Goldberg was insanely over at this point.
It's crazy, eh? And then at the same time, you'd head over onto the internet and everybody hated him because all they were doing to feed up this his feud was serving up the cruiserweights, serving up the guys that the smart community really, really liked. They were just fodder for Goldberg.
Hall versus Nash also doesn't happen. So Scott Hall is out with the entire NWO except for Hogan, Steiner, and Buff. Bischoff has orchestrated a setup, and they're all jumping Hall. Nash comes in a house of fire and beats up Less Cool Diesel. The outsiders clear the ring, and the crowd was happy to see Hall and Nash teaming up. But if you're a person who bought a ticket, are you happy that you don't get Scott Hall versus Kevin Nash and you don't get Rick Steiner versus Scott Steiner? Because I'm not.
That's 2 matches in a row that don't deliver. This is the kind of shit you pull on Thunder, my man. Not on a pay-per-view where your markup is 65% on the ticket. I may be exaggerating. I don't know what the markup was at the time, but
estimations. Hall goes for a 2 sweet, but Nash won't do it. WCW Television Championship match. Chris Jericho retains with Ralphus over Bobby Duncombe Jr. I gave this a 6 out of 10. It was a good match.
It was pretty good. A bit disappointed. I hadn't realized that this was going to happen, but the Break the Walls Down theme piped in over his Pearl Jam sound-alike at the time. It
was so weird to see him walk out with Ralphus to Break the Walls Down.
Yeah. It didn't work.
So different. The announcers will not shut up about Hollywood Hogan not being there tonight.
Mm-hmm.
That's all they want to talk about.
But I mean, that was par for the course in WCW at the time. Regardless of the match that you were watching, they'd be always talking about NWO because NWO had precedence over every other storyline. So,
and it was like Bobby Duncombe Jr., all things considered. So I mean, at the time, he was not a household name, so I can understand them trying to add a little spice by talking about Hogan. The world just lost Bobby Duncum 15 months later, though, tragically too. And you want to look at a guy that WWE would have loved to have in their performance center today. 6'4", 275, blonde hair, played the cowboy role, had some arena football experience, played for the Longhorns.
Like outside from the football experience, you know, the guy you just described here kind of sounds like Hangman Page, right? You know,
way bigger than Hangman.
No, but you know what I mean. It's still, it's
sure.
still the same type of character. Oh, for sure. I mean, this is a guy who would have he would have thrived outside of WCW. Honestly, the environment was so stacked with people that they weren't doing anything with, which would become apparent when they started introducing wrestlers for World War III. Then it become really apparent. But yeah, I mean, he did his best, and you know, he did have some good matches under his belt. This one, I agree, was pretty good.
His clothesline on Jericho was a little too close to the ropes. They brawl outside. Duncum gets a shoulder breaker, which I don't think we see enough of that move today. That's a good one.
Mm-hmm.
Duncum keeps working the shoulder, does a standing leg drop to Jericho's shoulder. So he's got Jericho arm ringered and leg drops the shoulder. That is a good spot. And follows up with a real arm bar. You can tell he worked a little bit in Japan. Jericho scores a lion salt and a nasty-looking senton, but Duncum gets a good superplex. Duncum does a front power slam as well as anybody. Him and Mark Henry do the best ones I've seen. Very good. Comes off the second rope with a celestial elbow, which is a Vader bomb-esque elbow drop, essentially. The move was called the celestial splash when Vader didn't use the Vader bomb. So Ralphus distracts Duncum, allowing Jericho to crack him hard with the title and win. This was a good watch, Warren.
It was fun. Ralphus's interference was a little weird, though, because he basically grabbed Bobby Duncan's leg, but he sort of just wrapped his arms around it, you know, and Duncum had Jericho up in a, he was lifting him, and I don't know if he was supposed to trip him or something, but he just sort of held on to the leg.
Yeah.
You know, just as if you're hugging a post, I guess. It doesn't trip him, doesn't look anything. And Duncan sort of just drops Jericho. It was a weird ending. But then I don't know if you've heard that episode of, if you haven't watched it, the episode of Talk is Jericho where Conrad Thompson interviews him. You know, it's sort of like a retort to Eric Bischoff's talk on Jericho. He talks about Ralphus at length, and Ralphus was getting a little big for his britches at this point, which was pretty funny. And when I was looking at him holding on to Bobby Duncan, I was like, no, there's no reason, dude, for you to start requesting more money or so on and so forth. It's pretty funny and a good listen if you're into it.
So this was the thing. I mean, Ralphus got a little too big for his britches. Got a little bit too eager. Didn't end up being the star he thought he would be.
No.
World War III. This is for a WCW title match at Starrcade. Kevin Nash wins. By the way, Jericho and Duncan went 13 minutes. This 60-man battle royal goes 22 minutes, 33 seconds. Such luminaries as Bobby Blaze, Mike Enos, Van Hammer, Norman Smiley, who is much more famous today than he was then, the Renegade. Barry Horowitz is in this, but you did also have Chris Jericho. You had Booker T. You had Saturn, Mysterio, Hall, Nash.
You had Chip Minton, Sean.
Chip Minton was in there.
Chip Minton, who was an Olympian bobsledder for the American team. Yep. He was an American bobsledder who went to the power plant to train, did a couple of matches as Mr. World Class. That was his original name, and then they just sent him back to Chip Minton. He didn't stay very long though, but
No, he only wrestled for like 5 years total.
yeah, and apparently now he works in a ministry. So
yeah,
good for
he's
him.
part of Team Impact, right?
Team Impact. When I saw that, when I was like, what? But no, it's not the same Impact.
Yeah. But Kevin Nash wins, and man, it does not speak well to me that this is the fourth one and they had not fine-tuned this at all. Why? At first I go, why are there refs in the ring? And then I remember eliminations count over, through, under the ropes, pin, and submission.
Yeah, it's the minute your feet touch the outside, you're eliminated.
I kind of like that for this, because otherwise getting over the top rope, but man, this match sucks. Nash eliminates 6 cruiserweights. They are dropping like flies. At least 10 of them are gone, and Nash's ring is empty, and he gets to take a breather until 20 men total are left. That's the rule. Then they all get into the middle ring. Boy.
I think it was around this period that Alex Wright had actually a pretty good moment here, where he was basically he was basically Dolph Ziggler today, you know, where you try to eliminate it from you think you've eliminated him from the Battle Royal, but you haven't. Like, there's a bunch of people who are trying to do it. Alex Wright can't pull it off. He actually had the better showing of any of the undercard wrestlers there.
Yeah. Hall fall away slam some scrub over the top. 6 guys jump giant, and we're talking Benoit, Saturn, Chavo, Eddie, Wright, and Disco. Lots of eliminations. 40 in 9 minutes. So uneventful that I can't go through them all.
No, that's what I was wondering. I had tweeted it out. You know, do you guys want to know how to book a 60-man battle royal in 22 minutes? WCW will show you how to do it. It was ridiculous. There's
all the time.
There's this one elimination though is when that's it. Yeah, you have Chavo, Eddie, Disco, the crew you just talked about. They've all been eliminated, and Giant eliminates Billy Kidman by pressing him and tossing him over the top rope onto the guys. Now, just to bring back my earlier point about mistreating the cruiserweights, I get it, right? Giant is huge. Billy is small. But Kidman is he's your newly minted cruiserweight champion, right? And he's just tossed overboard like a sack of flour. Come on. I mean, there at some point, you just have to take a step back and like, look, we can't do this to a guy that we just put over and that the crowd popped for. He got a great reaction for the win, and now we're just going to toss him over like he's nothing.
No pins or submissions like through the first 40 eliminations either. And I'm eager to go back and see if that was the case in previous years as well. There's a funny spot where Scott Hall's caught laughing after he smacks Mysterio. When it gets down to 20, Saturn is all too happy to jump in the middle of the ring and he and Cat eliminate each other. Then anyone under 220 pounds is thrown out. Later, hit the bricks. I can't tell you how much of a mess this is. People in the crowd are taking their shirts off. It's weird. It is an awkward spot. Bam Bam Bigelow runs in and gets beaten up by everyone. This was WCW trying to work a shoot. They wanted to get something between Goldberg and Bam Bam, and Goldberg runs out to a big pop.
I'd also like to point out that at this point, Eddie Guerrero has been eliminated. Chavo, Ray, Chris Jericho, they're all out, but Mongo's still in the ring.
Mongo is the absolute shits. He is terrible. And here he is. He's still there.
He's still there.
And mostly it's big guys. That's just where it is. K-Dog hilariously eliminates himself. There are 2 Horsemen, 3 Wolfpack, and 1 NWO member in the Giant. They gang up and eliminate the former winner in the Giant. What is there to say about this, really? People get eliminated. There's no build-up. Nash eliminates Luger and Hall to win. This sucked ass. This was terrible, Warren.
I don't know what to add. It was really, really bad. And but I remember watching. See, I have like I told you earlier. I remember watching the first World War III because the gimmick is so mind-boggling, right? You're like, how is this going to work? And as far as my memory goes, because I'd probably have to rewatch it again, I haven't seen any improvements here. And one of the things that WWE does so well when they do put on battle royals with and especially in the Royal Rumble. But then I'll get through my idea first and then give the caveat. But is that they give everyone involved a moment. You know, there's at least one moment in the match where you actually get to do something, even if it's small. But there is a focus, and it's much more well scripted. Of course, if we're talking about the Royal Rumble, well, everyone is coming in at 60-second or 2-minute intervals, depending. So, of course, you have more time to set these little moments up rather than just throwing 60 people into the rings at once.
I get the feeling there wasn't the old trick. The Battle Royal trick is you get eliminated when the guy before you gets eliminated. So you figure it out in the back. Who's the guy that's eliminated before me? Then you go out later. And that you just couldn't do that in this. And I'm going to interview some wrestlers about being in these and the process of it, because I think that's fascinating.
It'd be really cool to know about.
Also, the Bam Bam Bigelow thing. So he hadn't wrestled for WCW yet. He actually had appeared just before this, the Monday prior, and interrupted a match between Scott Putski and Chavo Guerrero, and he attacked both of them. And they kind of pretended that he was an outsider and he was coming after Goldberg. He would wrestle I think maybe a couple months later he debuted. I think he wrestled the next month. He wrestled Bill Goldberg on Nitro. And then he wrestled Goldberg and Nash on Nitro. And then finally, like, they just gave up on it. It just wasn't what it was. And he started the Jersey Triad. But Bill Goldberg had a couple different programs going on here between the Scott Steiner spear, the Kevin Nash being set up to face him, the Bam Bam Bigelow thing. They were all eggs in the Goldberg basket at this point.
And little did we know, Sean, at this moment in time, that this was the setup for what would eventually lead to the finger poke of doom, because Kevin Nash would win the title at Starrcade in December, a month later, with the taser, the Scott Hall taser, the controversial match, ending Goldberg's streak at 173 wins. And then, January 4th of 1999 is when the finger poke of doom happened then? Indeed. I mean, this set off a chain of events.
It sure did.
Chain of events.
The show is headlined by a WCW United States Championship match where DDP retains over Bret Hart. I gave this a 4.7 out of 5. Boy, they could have done better together.
Oh, right? I mean, I was actually looking forward. This was the one I was looking forward to. I was like, wow, man. Michael Buffer, to start off, when he introduces Bret, and I always like this when, when they give, just like in boxing or UFC, they talk about the color of the trunks, right? The gear to identify the wrestlers or the competitors.
Yeah.
He says Bret was wearing black trimmed with pink. No, the pink is like 75% of his gear. It's pink trimmed with black, but it's maybe a little weird to say out loud in that fashion.
But you can tell they wanted to give it a big match feel. Crowd was just not very pumped in this match, which starts outside the ring. Bret hits a DDT and a nice Russian leg sweep. The excellence of execution nickname is appropriate because he does these moves great. DDP reverses a tombstone into his own, does a nice belly-to-belly suplex and a discus lariat.
And I liked it, if I can just jump in, I liked it because I don't think, like, the tombstone pile driver, any kind of pile driver, wasn't in DDP's arsenal.
Yeah, well, he would adopt it and eventually use it.
But at this point, then that was cool.
I don't believe so. Yeah, what was in his arsenal was a terrible looking variation of the Styles Clash, which Shivani calls the Pancake, which is a terrible name for a move. And since then, I believe that it has been named the Diamond Clash.
It has been called the Diamond Clash since then.
So, which is, makes sense. But that's what we got. DDP drops a foreign object and puts on the worst sharpshooter I have ever seen, which Shivani and Heenan had the goddamn balls to put over. That was a really good looking one. Great looking sharpshooter. No, it wasn't. And I like DDP. He's a friend. I think the world of him. saved my in-ring wrestling life. What I get to do now in the ring, it's because of his program. My first sponsor ever, too. Interviewed him several times. This is the worst sharpshooter I've seen. Sorry, Dallas. Hart goes to work.
I don't know you, Dallas, but yeah, he's right.
Yeah. It was bad. It was bad. Hart goes to work on DDP's leg on the ring post, does the figure 4 on it. DDP counters Bret Hart's move, which doesn't have a name. This move that Bret Hart has done in every match he's ever done doesn't have a name, where he puts their leg on the rope and he drops his ass across their leg. It's essentially a roped senton, but it needs a name, even though it hasn't been done in forever. So DDP tries to use a chair, but Bret pushes DDP into the rope, steals the knucks, and punches him, while Slick Johnson returns to distract DDP. Slick, who apparently has no authority at all, calls for the sharpshooter, even though DDP didn't tap, because you know it's November.
You know what that means.
Oh, we got to run the angle. Now, to be fair, this is the first year after.
But it's funny that commentary didn't put that over. Like they could have at least said, "Oh, wait a second, we've seen this before." But now Bret's he's on the giving end of the, But no, it's just like.
Now the unfortunate thing is, this was a week after WWE had already done it. At Survivor Series '98, I believe it was. They had ran through all that, and I believe The Rock beat Mankind where they called for the bell.
That's right.
So they already did this, I believe, with a sharpshooter as well.
Yes, that's
so doesn't play as well. The first real pop of the match is for Mickey J. Mickey J comes out and confronts everyone. Diamond Dallas Page hits the Diamond Cutter for the win. That's it. DDP wins. Yikes. This was not great. And I thought it would be, because DDP is a shining glimmer of hope on so many of these shows because he does different things. This wasn't great. And I feel like if they had another shot, it would be. So I'm going to seek out more of their matches.
This is also indicative of how endings were done quite a lot in WCW back then. It was overbooked for no particular reason.
Well before Russo. Well before Russo.
Well before Russo. You can't put that exclusively on him. It was just overbooked for no reason. If the NWO ref is going to come in and call the match, you just leave it as such, But no, it was too many shenanigans. I'm going to tell you one thing, though, Sean. The main thing that took me out of the match was Bret was working Dallas's leg for most of the match. And then, he's been deconstructing it, and then at some point, they go to the outside, and then DDP doesn't seem to be selling it much. And then he does, he does the sharpshooter to the outside, on the post to Bret as well, sort of like, you can do it, I can do it too. And I'm like, wow, if your leg has been demolished like Bret just did, you should not be pulling this move. And his selling of the leg the entire match was not bad. It's just non-existent. And that sort of took me out because it was a big part of the story. Bret softening up the leg for the sharpshooter.
So, I mean, this match, it's like, God, how many times can you do it? They did it in July, and it was like a 3-minute match, and it was a title change. Bret Hart won the title. Then he defended the title, and it was a DQ maybe 3-4 weeks later on Nitro. Then you wait a couple months, and then on Nitro, DDP beats Bret Hart for the title. And then 2 weeks later, they go to Saturday Night. DDP beats Bret Hart again. Okay. Then at World War III, Dallas Page beats Bret Hart just 5 days later. Beats him. Okay, so then why are they wrestling again? 8 days later, Warren, on Nitro after this show, Bret Hart defeats Diamond Dallas Page in 4 minutes. Wow. Wow. You don't need to do it that many times. This feud was not that hot. Let's look where people went. Billy Kidman did get a push after this. He went and he beat Rey Mysterio and Juventud Guerrera in a triple threat at Starrcade in 15 minutes. And then immediately after, beat Eddie Guerrero in 10 minutes. So quite the run that Billy Kidman went on here after this. Norman Smiley would go on and beat Prince Iaukea because, he got that big push in World War III.
Yep.
Saturn would gain a measure of revenge and defeat Ernest Miller the next month. Fake Diesel, Brian Adams, who he and Scott Norton would beat Fit Finley and Jerry Flynn. You want to talk about a match that doesn't belong on Nitro, doesn't belong on Thunder. That's a WCW Saturday night match. It was on Starrcade. The
biggest WCW pay-per-view of the year.
Yes.
You have it there.
Conan, after his big beatdown, would go on and defeat Chris Jericho, win the television championship. Eric Bischoff would beat Ric Flair the month later. That was something that had just been set up. DDP after this would go on and beat the Giant, who is in full jobbing out mode at this point on his way out. And as we know, Kevin Nash would defeat Goldberg. So on Starrcade, Rick Steiner did not wrestle. Scott Steiner did not wrestle. Scott Hall did not wrestle. He showed up with a taser. Stevie Ray did not wrestle. Raph did not wrestle. Lex was not on this show.
Nor was Sting.
Nor was Sting. Nor was Hogan. Man.
It's a weird period, eh?
A rough Slim Pickens period. World War III. To be honest with you, I remembered nothing of this show when you recommended it. What I will remember is, not even to take a shot at you, I'll remember Bobby Duncombe Jr.'s performance. He had a nice, promising performance, and I hate that we lost him.
Yeah.
I hate that he was gone at 34 years old in January of 2000. The West Texas Rednecks that was good heat for me. As much as I didn't like the No Limit Soldiers in WCW, I liked their music. I was a No Limit Soldier fan. I was a fan of Master P and Silk the Shocker, and now I am ashamed to say Mystical after what he's gone on to do. I liked Fiend. I liked Mia X. I liked those people. I did not like him in WCW, but when the West Texas Rednecks came out and sang Rap is Crap, they had heat with me. Real heat with me. I wanted to see them lose. So I hate that we don't have Bobby Duncombe Jr. around anymore, and I will think back to this Kidman Juventud Guerrera match as well, and I'll remember that fondly. I'll remember Wrath being over, the meltdown being over, despite that shitty match. But what do you look back on?
I look back on the fact that the Warrior had just recently returned, and he was nowhere to be found on this show, despite the fact that the Disciple was wearing his One Warrior Nation colors. And always wondering, the Renegade was one of the 60 men in this match. Why was the Renegade never recruited into Warrior's faction, which was always a faction of two? Let's point that out. Calling back and saying, young warrior, you tried to emulate me. Let me take you under my wing and become a true warrior. That could have led to some brilliant, absolutely brilliant bullshit by Warrior.
Worth mentioning, Renegade, we lost him just 3 months after this.
Yeah.
He died of suicide just 3 months later. He was released from WCW because WCW had the Real Warrior at that point, and then they didn't like the Real Warrior, and self-inflicted gunshot wound took him at 33, which is a shame. Not my style in wrestling, but hey. Also, Bobby Blaze was on this show. He was born about 40 minutes from me in Ashland, Kentucky. That is the highlight of his career, is being born near me. And being mentioned on this podcast.
There you go. Because of Fightful.
One of our little fun fact, Kyler wrote that on some post, like when Riddle got signed, or like it was something. And I was like, don't do that. That's sarcastic. I do that facetiously. I'm not serious about that. So let's not do that, because that makes us seem like pretentious dickwads, and I don't want to do that. Retro review. FightfulSelect.com. Let us know what you thought. We want your reviews of these matches. We want your thoughts. What did you like? What did you not like? What did you think of what we liked and didn't like? Let people on Twitter know. Comment here on Fightful Select. Let us know Warren, let the people know where they can follow you on social media.
I've got on top of everything I do here, because I do these retro pay-per-view podcasts with Sean. I also do the NXT 205 live recap show. These days I'm adding in the Mae Young Classic, maybe adding in some NXT UK. Still got some very harsh negotiations going on with Mr. Sapp here. And otherwise, you can find me at tinyurl.com/Mr. Warren Hayes. That's my own personal YouTube channel, or on Twitter at Mr. Warren Hayes.
Follow me at Sean Ross Sapp. Spread the word. Fightful Select. Thank you, guys. We're out.